Well, hello there. My name's Irrelevant. This is Do All the Things. Welcome to the show. And on today's episode, this thing. What is this thing? Well, I know what it is now, but it was funny when I pulled it out of archives and I'd forgotten completely what it was. I gotta talk about that today. It's actually quite interesting for YouTube guys. So what do we have here? Well, on the back label, Radio Communications Equipment, Engineering Limited, Montreal, Model 5C. It was an old phono amplifier. Or, it had a mic input too. And I found this in a buddy's basement back in the early 2000s. It was an apartment he moved into and it was just there, kind of half smashed. He didn't know what it was and he let me have it. And for the longest time, I used it as a kind of portable practice amp. I had this PV Rage combo that another buddy gave to me that had the circuits gutsed out of it. And I just screw holes, bolted this thing onto the top and plugged a metal zone into it. And it worked rather well. But of course, over the years, I used it as an experimental chassis in order to test certain tube circuit designs, and I've done numerous things with this. I remember at one point when I started experimenting with, what are those, VST plugins, those guitar amp emulators for recording. I wanted a preamp that felt like a guitar amp. That was probably one of my more successful designs in here that worked pretty well. I simulated the front end of a guitar amp, and then I could plug it into the input of my sound card, whatever I was using back then, and then boom, I'd play a recording into the computer. But more recently, I pulled this out of the archives and I'm like, oh, it's a little single-ended tube amp. And I made it to run random octal tubes. Right now there's an EL34 in there. I hadn't fired this thing up in almost a decade, so I fired it up to see, hey, what was I thinking back then? And indeed, what was I thinking? That's quite the hum. The power supply on this is very sloppily engineered. Not that I didn't know how to do better, but I didn't for whatever reason. I guess it doesn't sound that bad because it is tube, but it's very MIDI. No bueno. This is in parallel mode. Okay, it's not a very pleasant tone. Very mid-honky, as I mentioned. But then I started looking at the circuit. If we look on the underside, as you can see, there's a lot going on in here. Like, look at all those clusters of components and point-to-point wiring. And, handiwork of mine from, about 10 years ago, when I mostly knew what I was doing, but I was trying to work around point-to-point, and, well, there's a little bit of my genius in there, but a little bit not. Kind of just throw together slop is what I'm seeing there. But then I'm noticing something. I have this isolated jack. That's the speaker jack. That is some sort of isolated jack, and it's tapped off the first gain stage. The closest thing that I have to a schematic for this is right here, except this is not a 120. This is a 220. That's not an 022. It's an 001. And that is a 330. The rest is pretty much accurate, and it's before the gain knob, and I didn't really finish the rest of the schematic. 47K on the second stage, really? No, that's not accurate either. Whatever. And then I had a memory. Oh, no hum pulling the power tube. This memory was that this was a tube overdrive that I threw together when I first got my Marshall and didn't have an overdrive pedal yet. And if you know anything about the 800, the only real way to get good modern distortion sounds out of it is to have a proper overdrive pedal. Distortion just won't do. And that's what I did, loosely based on the Ignator Mega Drive mod, which adds another tube to your Marshall to push it into metal gain distortion. This adds one tube stage before the input to push it into metal grade distortion. Now that circuit's different from the Ignator, but I see now what I was trying to do, and I like it. I would much rather use a tube overdrive than an overdrive pedal. So how can we further expand on this concept? I like this. I like this a lot. I want more of this. Now, as it says right now, it has a stock 6 SL7 preamp tube. I'm not sure if that's the one that came with it or if I found a NOS tube after the fact, but it works. Slightly microphonic. Because, you know, I don't know that they intended the SL7 to be used for metal gain distortion, and I'm wondering if anyone else in human history has used an SL7 to boost a JCM 800 before. Interesting thing is, there's other little triode deals. We can chuck her in here to make it chooch. Here is a really good 6SN7. Let's see how that sounds. We gotta do something about that hum bud. A little bit more crunchier, less gain sensitivity. Yeah, better mid crunch out of this tube. I almost feel like it'd be better for more rocky tones. Lost our harmonics though. There are other tubes that aren't intended to be preamp tubes that have the same pinout. This is a 5998 random Big R Stool triode. I think it's some sort of posh ass power tube, and it doesn't work properly in this circuit, but it does work. The funny thing is, with that tube in place, it has the same amount of distortion gain as plugging straight into the Marshall, but there's a touch of extra something mojo that's not there plugged directly into the Marshall. A little bit more sensitivity and sustain. I'm hearing strange noises. Now, of course, there is another angle. Back in the day, I used this. Yeah, sexy. That's a 12AX7 to that pinout 6 SL7 adapter. Just gotta pop an ECC83S in here. Decent V1 tube. Yeah. That one's humming real bad because it's sticking so far out. There's like no shielding. And that is, whoa, hey, you're a hummy buddy. Okay, we're gonna silence you for now, bud. Now that tone was more consistent with what we expect out of a guitar amp. Indeed, we put a 12AX7 in there and it sounds more like what we expect to hear, as opposed to the maybe softer tone, the 6SNLL. You know what tube I'm talking about, compared to the sound that guy puts out. So, why am I demonstrating this today? Well, I wanted you guys to see this thing before I rip it apart. You see, I want to further expand on this by officiating it into a tube overdrive. I like this so much. We just need to clean up on this circuit a bit. You know, maybe screw with these values here to get a proper gain structure out of it. It's getting a little bit muddy there. We probably don't need 220 here. That thing is 001. We could fatten that up a bit with maybe a 047. No, a 0047. That's what's more typically used in some of these high gain circuits like Soldano and the Mega Drive mod. 22K, maybe that should be a 68. I don't know. Maybe that's the reason why I like the sustain of the 5998 tube. I hear that lowering that value makes you a little bit more pick sensitive. But obviously I have no use for this as a power amp. I'm gonna disable that power section there. Need to clean up on the filtering. Need to make it just a preamp driver. And maybe some DC filaments too. Yes, that would be good. Either way, I need to proof of concept this guy, and to proof of concept it, I have to take it apart. So I want a record of it before I do. Oh, we got a little single-ended transformer here. Well, that's gonna go. We're gonna put a filter choke in place. I have this Hammond 20H50 milliamp that I have no idea what I was gonna do with until I got this thing. I think a little filtration like this is gonna be perfect for it. Or maybe overkill. Some research I found says you can't really have too much choke, so I guess we'll see. I wanna do something interesting here. It's gonna be really boring if I just have one tube. I'm gonna keep the tube rectifier. That's nice. I'm gonna change out this capacitor. That's one of the old capacitors out of my JCM 800. Don't necessarily trust them anymore, even though I'm sure they're fine. This adapter, well, I'm gonna want that. Now, I got two modes of thought here. Do I want to, like, you know, put a tube socket in here? A small proper tube socket for a 12AX7? It would be quieter. Or do I want to stick with an 8-pin and then adapt it? Or omit the 8-pin altogether? I kind of like the idea of being able to plug in those old triodes to play with those, but it's not necessarily practical because I'll probably never buy one for this. Whether or not I want to wear down what's left of my NOS stock, probably not. But then I'm also thinking of doing something really silly, like a voltage regulator here. I want something for that position. I want something for that position. I got this dinky cute little single diode tube. Maybe just chuck her in there. I've tested it, it works. Just to fill in that space, glow, look pretty, hook it up to the heaters. Maybe not even turn it on or hook anything up to it. But as a diode, I guess I could throw it in the circuit. Maybe if it has a little bit of voltage drop, I can use it as part of an RC filter without needing the actual R. But then a diode probably responds faster than a resistor, right? So I don't know how effective an RC that would be. I don't know if it would be proper, the R in the RC. Otherwise, voltage regulation. There's this super excellent article I found online at I don't know. Pause and read that if you're interested, or just Google tube voltage regulator. He starts off with the basic concept of, oh, here's your normal guy. Oh, here's the ripple we get. But if we put some voltage regulation, this guy right here is really handy. I've used that before to build screen grid power supplies and amps before, because there's some designs that involve 6550s and KT88s that the screen grid is run off a separate power supply at a significantly lower voltage than the actual plate. And because I didn't have the extra secondary windings to accommodate that, I used an EL34 with that voltage regulator design to build that screen grid, and it worked. But then, you know, it gets a little bit more enhanced here. By the time we get down to the rabbit hole to this design, well, it's getting pretty smart, where we have this little diode dealie right here that senses the peaks in ripple coming off of the bridge rectifier and then samples that into the control grid in such a way to, you know, have the control grid vibrate with those peaks to cancel them out. And according to him, he got this down to 50 millivolts ripple. So that will be some pure filtration for one little tube. Yes. Another fundamental part of this plan is to fabricate a better adapter. Now, if you have dead power tubes and you're careful, you can rip the bases off of them. That's where I got that other one. And then here I have a ceramic tube socket that I kind of want to see how just deeply I can get it to sit in there and then still wire it up and do the adapter. If I don't have big, long tailings coming off of this, I could probably eliminate some of that hum. If that doesn't work, I can always rebuild it. 12AX7 socket's probably a good idea. And then maybe I could wire these two sockets in parallel so I could switch between them. But at the same time, that could be problematic in and of itself. But you know, just imagine this is here and that is there. And you know, that'll be cute. And it'll give it a little bit of rise. Just a little bit of rise. Maybe I should go on eBay and order one of the metal bases, because you can buy just the bases. And that would you know, have a little bit more shielding. Copper wire products, Guelph, when they actually made things domestically. It was a different time. There's a lot going on in here. But not really, it just looks busy. So yeah, I need to rip this apart, start exercising certain proof of concepts, like drawing different cathode bypass, trying a different value here, making this an actual gain knob. I got the knob right there. And then we will reconvene when I've made up my mind what I'm doing with this, and I will show you the design. So stay tuned. Stay tuned, you must. Yeah. Goodbye.